Hi guys, and welcome back to SwitchUp. Thank you so much to Jace Glover. He seems to be our resident NIS America reviewer, and he's written this review of the Caligula Effect Overdose. Thank you to NIS for the review copy, and to all the Patreons and everyone else who supports us on the channel. I'm going to be honest, my life has been insanely busy so far in 2019, and I'm sure the hardcore SwitchUp fans out there will have noticed that reviews from me have slowed considerably. However, when Mark sends you a personal video from his garden begging you to review a game, it's hard to say no. I don't know about begging, Jace. That's a bit of a push. All joking aside, I love doing these reviews when I can. The Caligula Effect Overdose is a remake of a JRPG originally released on the PS Vita back in 2016. The following in Japan for the original was even big enough that an anime mini-series was created in 2018 based on the game's story. The remake promises better graphics, 2 new main characters, as well as 2 new antagonists, entirely new storylines, streamlined and improved combat, and the option to play as a female protagonist. It sounds like quite the upgrade, but is it worth it? Let's find out. The story follows a group of students called the Go Home Club who have become aware that the world they live in is nothing more than a virtual reality called Mobius, created in an attempt to end all the pain and suffering of the world. The club, with you as its newest member, fights to uncover the secrets of Mobius, its creation, and how to escape this fake life. Hang on, it sounds like Trump. And get back to the real world. Standing in your way is one of the world's creators, you, and the ostinato musicians. You only wants eternal peace and happiness, but she's gone too far and refuses to give anyone the choice to leave, and uses the musicians as a tool to brainwash the inhabitants of Mobius and keep them complacent. Man, Glen, this would have given your mermaid storyline a run for its money. I'm sure by now you are confused, and rightfully so. There were many times during my playthrough where I verbally shouted, "What?" at my TV screen. The story is weird and the characters even stranger, especially the ostinato musicians. I had a hard time getting into it at first, but it does all start to come together after many hours, and I eventually found myself wanting to find out what happens. There are other issues though that drag this story-driven experience down further. Each character was originally brought into Mobius after suffering some sort of physical or emotional trauma, and this trauma drives every interaction and conversation, resulting in each character feeling disconnected from the group. This serves to make all of them one-dimensional and unrelatable, and I had a hard time caring about any single person. The story segments themselves often drag on far too long, lasting anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour between actual gameplay sections, which pulled me out of the experience. You can fast forward through almost all of these sections, but then risk missing important details surrounding the main plot. The overarching plot is intriguing, if not a little bit confusing, but the presentation and characters just drag it down. The story for me scores 12 out of 20. In terms of gameplay, the loop here sees you moving from story point to story point via linear dungeons filled with only 2 things: enemies and side quest NPCs. Encountering an enemy will trigger a battle sequence with that person, as well as any others nearby. Combat is a turn-based affair, not unlike many of the genre, but there are some unique and interesting mechanics that shake things up a bit. The first is called the imaginary chain. After selecting an action, the imaginary chain will show you the potential outcome of that action. It's kind of cool. While in this screen, you will also be shown the enemy's next move and can then adjust the timing of your own choices to better fit the situation. Or you can just back out and choose another action entirely. The next unique battle mechanic is the action chain. Each of your characters can choose up to 3 actions at a time per turn, or you can commit as few as 1 action, thereby decreasing your turn cooldown for the next round. These mechanics combined add a level of strategy to each battle and force you to think through each move carefully, or at least that's the intention. Unfortunately, the system is fairly easy to cheese, and battling becomes a monotonous grind. Most of the time you can limit your encounters to just 1 or 2 enemies and just charge in with all 4 of your party members, destroying them in seconds. The only battles that take any real thought are those with enemies higher leveled than your current party, and the only reason these are more difficult is because your chance to hit the enemy drops. Earlier I mentioned the side quest NPCs that you will come across. Each one of these characters has a quest that they will need help with, but to access it you first must talk to them 3 times to make them your friend. Yep, you heard me correctly. You become friends just by talking to them 3 times. If only I had that luck in my life, Jace. If I'm forced to talk to every single character 3 times before I can take on their quest, then the quest itself better be interesting, but unfortunately that isn't the case here. All of the side quests are unimaginative, such as defeat 20 enemies or equip this item, and quite often these are repeated between NPCs. The developers use it as a selling point that there are over 500 of these characters throughout the world, but I see that and imagine completing all of them is what purgatory must be like. As uninteresting as these are, they are the only way to unlock passive ability items, meaning you're forced to do at least some of them if you want your characters to be as strong as they can be. Speaking of items, there are 3 types to be found throughout the world, by getting them as a drop from defeating enemies or lying around in the dungeons. The 3 types are attack, defense, and amplification, but all serve the same purpose of giving you some number of primary stats. In the same vein as the quest NPCs, the items are overabundant and 95% of them will be useless to you, making it even less likely that you'll want to explore the full layout of the dungeon instead of just jumping straight to the next story progression. When the story suffers in a lengthy JRPG, then the gameplay had better make up for it. Unfortunately here, it's mediocre. It scores 10 out of 20. Rebuilt from the remake on the Unreal Engine, the anime style visuals are just okay, at least while in docked mode. There are some jagged edges and the character movements are not entirely fluid, but I've seen worse. The biggest problem for me was the world design. Some of the levels have nice color palettes and visuals that pop off the screen, but each of them suffers from the same empty feeling. In the aquarium level, the fish don't move in the tanks. In the outdoor mall, there are no vendors or bustling activity. The NPC characters just wander around aimlessly, and when you load into a new zone, a huge group of them spawn in at once and just meander about as a herd to their designated spots within the level. Additionally, only the main characters have any personality to their design, while the rest of the NPCs are the same 2 or 3 models repeated 100 times over. None of this helps pull the player into the game and again detracted from my interest in the world and its inhabitants. In another strange design choice, most of the story scenes are presented as dialogue between characters via the in-game graphics, with the characters' hand-drawn versions shown on the screen. In contrast, the opening cutscene is fully animated. During my playthrough, I did not expect to see any more of these types of scenes until maybe the very end, but about 7 hours in, at the most random of times, there was another fully animated cutscene, and it was the only one I came across for the next 13 hours. I have no idea why that particular moment was chosen, but I would have enjoyed the story far more if there had been other instances like this. There is another major issue with the Nintendo Switch release. It's the handheld mode. Everything just gets so blurry and muddy. Now, I've played over 100 games on Switch so far and have never seen this type of drop in fidelity moving from dock to handheld. If this was a live action as opposed to a turn-based game, it would be nearly unplayable. If the handheld issues are patched out in the future, then I'd give visuals a score of 12 out of 20. But given the importance of gaming on the go to the Nintendo audience, I have no choice but to give a score of 6 out of 20. Much like the visuals, the audio is a mixed bag with some extreme highs and lows. While the soundtrack is not something I'd normally listen to on my own, I try not to score based on my personal preference, and instead try to see it for what it is. Where the soundtrack suffers is not due to a lack of quality composing or sound mixing, but instead in its lack of variety within levels. You may spend 2 to 3 hours in a dungeon, but you will be listening to the same song on loop for that entire time. Additionally, the story has you confronting one musician after another, and the dialogue will talk about the type of music that should be playing, but instead what is actually playing will be the polar opposite. In one level in particular, a group of girls is talking about how the music is so mellow and soft, and some of the male characters talk about how girly it is. Meanwhile, the music that's playing in the background is closer to thrash metal. Most of the story scenes are voice acted, and the voice actors did a very good job overall capturing emotion, but the writing lets them down badly. At one point, my wife literally told me I needed to play in handheld or go somewhere else because the high-pitched shrills and exclamations of the female characters occur far too often and were driving her nuts. It's worth noting that there is no English dub option. Sound effects suffer as well, simply due to game design. It is hard to separate one effect from the next during battle, as anywhere from 5 to 8 characters are firing off attacks at the same time. Instead, you're just hit with a cacophony of gunshots, yells, laser blasts, sounds, etc. Overall audio scores 10 out of 20. The main story in the Caligula Effect Overdose will last you around 20 hours. In addition, there are multiple storylines and different dialogue depending on whether you choose male or female as your protagonist. And of course the aforementioned 500 plus side quest characters to find. Even considering all that content, the game has too many issues to sit at the premium $49.99 asking price, and I certainly cannot recommend picking this up unless you're absolutely certain this is your kind of game. And I know there's some of you out there. If you're interested in the story, you'd be better off signing up for a free trial on Crunchyroll and checking out the anime, which wouldn't cost you a dime. Value scores 8 out of 20. To conclude, the Caligula Effect Overdose is a bit of a mess that will only appeal to a very specific audience. The combat system has some unique elements that I'd love to see refined and used in a more cohesive game, but this one is riddled with too many strange design choices to be enjoyable. In addition, the Switch version suffers from a major downgrade in graphic fidelity when in handheld mode, and there's just no excuse for that. The Caligula Effect Overdose receives an overall SwitchUp score of 46%. Now, strangely, this was done before Glen's review. The parallel is real. Thanks so much to Jace for writing this one, and to all of our Patreons and the rest of you on the channel. Well done again to Ian, who won this month's free game. And for all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!